Greetings, friends, greetings. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to the Crossroads Show, episode 1. I'm your host, Nico, and today I'm going to be talking about the World Economic Forum's Great Reset initiative and why I and others believe that, contrary to its stated aims of inclusion and inclusive capitalism and the overall betterment of humanity, this is starting to look much more like a corporate takeover of society. If you like this analysis, let me know by liking and subscribing to the Crossroads. And let me know because I've got much more content coming your way as well. There's a lot to talk about these days. And without further ado, let's take a look at this great reset. Alright, so let's begin by getting a quick overview of what the World Economic Forum is and what it does. And I think the easiest way to do this is to just go straight to their website and take a look at the Our Mission section and see what they say. Okay, so our mission. The World Economic Forum is the international organization for public-private cooperation. There immediately it's interesting because they don't say it's an international organization, it's the international organization for public-private cooperation. Okay, so the forum engages the foremost political, business, cultural, and other leaders of society to shape global, regional, and industry agendas. Okay, so they engage the public-private sectors to shape, as I just said, the global, regional, and industry agendas. So they set the direction of where things are going, or at least it would seem that way from the description. It was established in 1971 as a not-for-profit foundation and is headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland. It is independent, impartial, and not tied to any special interests. Pretty impressive not to be tied to any special interests, considering you meet with some of the world's most powerful people and companies and corporations, but okay. So the forum strives in all its efforts to demonstrate entrepreneurship in the global public interest while upholding the highest standards of governance. Moral and intellectual integrity is at the heart of everything it does. Okay. Our activities are shaped by a unique institutional culture founded on the stakeholder theory, which asserts that an organization is accountable to all parts of society. The institution carefully blends and balances the best of many kinds of organizations, from both the public and private sectors, international organizations, and academic institutions. So they engage with pretty much all aspects of society, from corporations, public institutions, and academic institutions as well, so universities, etc. We believe that progress happens by bringing together people from all walks of life who have the drive and influence to make positive change. Okay, so here is a pretty sort of quick overview of what they do and what they strive for. We know that they are the organization for public-private cooperation, so they engage these two sort of spheres of society, and they set the agenda. And of course here they don't talk about Davos, the fact that they meet once a year, but I assume you know already. And basically they get together, they engage with these leaders, and they set the stage and they steer the ship, so to speak, or at least it would seem. And of course, the reason why we're talking about the World Economic Forum today is because of the Great Reset, this agenda that was established last year, but of course they didn't just come up with it in 2020. It's been in the works, so to speak. And here again we can just go to their website and take a look at what they say in terms of what the Great Reset is. And so we're gonna have a quick, again, it's just a couple of paragraphs that I'll read you. And after this we're gonna take a quick look at the partners, because of course, as I just read to you, they engage with such important companies and corporations, and I think it's great to, in order to gain a proper understanding of the scope of their influence and power, to just look at the list of partners, and I'll show you this in a moment. But first, let's look at the Great Reset. So there's an urgent need for global stakeholders to cooperate in simultaneously managing the direct consequences of the COVID-19 crisis. To improve the state of the World Economic Forum is starting the Great Reset initiative. Okay, sounds great. So the context is that the COVID-19 crisis and the political, economic, and social disruptions it has caused is fundamentally changing the traditional context for decision-making. The inconsistencies, inadequacies, and contradictions of multiple systems, from health and financial to energy and education, are more exposed than ever amidst a global context of concern for lives, livelihoods, and the planet. Leaders find themselves at a historic crossroads. managing short-term pressures against medium and long-term uncertainties. Okay, so there we have the context of the Great Reset, but of course, there's an opportunity, like good business people. As we enter a unique window of opportunity to shape the recovery, again, the whole setting the stage and shaping the agenda, this initiative will offer great insights to help inform all those determining the future state of global relations, the direction of national economies, the priorities of societies, the nature of business models, and the management of a global commons. Interesting terminology there. Drawing from the vision and vast expertise of the leaders engaged across the forum communities, which we're about to see in a moment, the kinds of leaders that are engaged with this, the Great Reset Initiative has a set of dimensions to build a new social contract that honors the dignity of every human being. Oh, so there's going to be a new social construct. Yeah, I was getting tired of the one I signed right after I was born. So it's good that they're setting up a new one. So as I just said, let's take a look at the partners that have got together and partnered up with the World Economic Forum. I have a little list here that I made. Of course, here you can go. Again, this is their website. You can check it out for yourself. They go through every letter, A, B, C. But I've made a little list of the sort of standouts. So we have, Goldman Sachs. We have Amazon Web Services. We have BlackRock Investments. Left these people to decide the future of humanity. We have Apple. Not as bad, I guess, but we have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, HSBC, huge banks, and anyone else Visa, of course, Visa, MasterCard. So these are arguably the biggest companies' financial interests on planet Earth getting together and setting the agenda for the future using COVID-19 as an opportunity, effectively. And if that sounds a bit hyperbolic, well, I can assure you that it's not really, because here I have the book, actually. I actually bought the book. It was about, I think, £8 or something. But this is COVID-19, The Great Reset, which was written last year in June, or at least it was released in June of last year. I'm not sure if it was how long it took to write, but it was written supposedly by Klaus Schwab and another man, I think an economist called Thierry Maleret, who is French. And they got together, they wrote this book, and here is just the introduction. And I just want to show you a few quotes, I think 3 or 4 quotes that I set aside in order to, again, go straight to the source. This is not some kind of analysis that anyone made. This is the people that are in charge of this telling us, what the context and what the opportunity and what the ideas for the futures are and should be. And okay, so let's see. This is right at the introduction. This is page 11 of the book. The fault lines of the world, most notably social divides, lack of fairness, absence of cooperation, failure of global governance and leadership, now lie exposed as never before. And people feel the time for reinvention has come. A new world will emerge, the contours of which are for us to both imagine and to draw. Now that's very interesting, because I think it's hard to disagree with that. I think the fault lines have been clear for quite some time. From extreme inequality to wealth concentration at the top 1% of the top 1%. It's insane how things have become over the past, I would say, 40, 50 years. And, there's all sorts of crises that we are facing. And I think many people, including myself, would agree it's time to change things. But the issue is, how are we going to change them? And what kind of institutions and people are we putting in charge of these changes? And so here it makes the argument. And again, it taps into a very valid feeling, I think. But I think that's part of the sort of marketing aspect. This is the element that is useful in terms of selling this whole Great Reset plan to the masses, so to speak, because it sounds great. Oh, reinvention. They talk about multi-stakeholder, for the few, capitalism for the many, not for the few, and all these sort of buzzwords attached to these large-scale plans to change society. There was another quote there I wanted to read you, actually. At the time of writing, June 2020, the pandemic continues to worsen globally. Many of us are pondering when things will return to normal. The short response is never. Nothing will ever return to the broken sense of normalcy that prevailed prior to the crisis because the coronavirus pandemic marks a fundamental inflection point in our global trajectory. So here they're telling us already in June, and this book was only released, I think in June, July. So, I mean, let's be real, they didn't get together 3 weeks before the release and write this. This has been in the works, as I said earlier, for quite some time, and they're telling us things will never return to normal. So I think it's very important to be clear about the fact that they see this as a big opportunity to change arguably every aspect of society. So there was another quote on page 15 that I want to share with you, and here they make the comparison from the other pandemics, basically, and how they changed society then. So the Black Death may have been the unrecognized beginning of modern man. If such profound social, political, and economic changes could be provoked by the plague in the medieval world, could the COVID-19 pandemic... Oh, excuse me. A Freudian slip there. Could the COVID-19 pandemic mark the onset of a familiar turning point with long-lasting and dramatic consequences for our world today? Unlike certain past pandemics, COVID-19 doesn't pose a new existential threat. So here they tell us, which sounds pretty contrary. I mean, fine, the news haven't told us this is going to destroy humanity, but it's pretty close, I think, the way they make it sound from time to time. So yeah, they tell us that it's not an existential threat. It will not result in the unforeseen mass famines or major military defeats and regime changes. Whole populations will neither be exterminated nor displaced as a result of the pandemic. However, this does not equate to a reassuring analysis. Okay. In reality, the pandemic is dramatically exacerbating pre-existing dangers that we failed to confront adequately for too long, which I would also kind of agree with. And... But again, this makes me think, it's so clear now that this is seen as a sort of opportunity. And again, I want to highlight, this is a man writing, okay, Klaus Schwab and whoever the economist was that wrote it with him. But let's not forget that Klaus Schwab is the man who started the World Economic Forum 50 years ago, and he's been at the head ever since. And he is arguably the most well-connected man on earth. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that he might be saying this, and it might sound like, oh, it's just one man saying this and he maybe doesn't have that much power. But again, look back at the partners and the sort of institutions that have got together and that have been getting together and networking and talking to one another over the years at Davos and to other meetings. And this is starting to look like maybe there are certain incentives for making the economy die, so to speak. And the next quote will show you this quite clearly, I think. And the next quote is on page 37, if I'm not mistaken. Page 46. Here we go. So what the history of previous epidemics shows again and again is how pandemics exploit trade routes and the clash that exists between the interests of public health and those of economics. And here's a quote from, where's it from actually? Does he say it? Anyway, I'll just read you the quote. In the midst of calamity, economics was always at loggerheads with the interests of public health, even though until there was an understanding of germ-borne diseases, the plague was mostly attributed to foul air and noxious vapors, said to arise from stagnant or polluted marshes. There was nonetheless a sense that the very commercial arteries that had generated prosperity were now transformed into vectors of poison. But when quarantines were proposed or imposed, those who stood to lose the most, merchants, and in some places artisans and workers, from the stoppage of markets, fair trade, put up stiff resistance, which is something that I guess we've seen a bit, but not really. I mean, it's really small businesses that have lost out the most, I think, throughout these lockdowns and economic shutdowns. But here's the important part. Must the economy die so that it could be resurrected in robust good health? Yes, said the guardians of public health, who became part of urban life in Europe from the 15th century onwards. History shows that epidemics have been the great resetter of countries' economy and social fabric. Why should it be any different with COVID-19? And again, just what I was saying earlier, there is a clear motive here to keep things locked down, to keep things shut down. He's literally telling us, Must the economy die? I mean, that's the other person's quote, but then he supports the statement, why should it be different? And I think that's a clear indication of what we're going through right now. But what I really do think the bigger picture is here. I mean, money rules the world if you think about it. And I do think, and I've said this before, that in order to understand what's happening fully, one has to start with the financial aspect. And the truth is that for the past, as I said earlier, I think 40 or 50 years, there's been massive inequities building up within our systems, across nations, across communities, across continents even. And what we've seen are particular trends that have resulted in all sorts of patterns from, for example, wage stagnation, as I was saying earlier, wealth buildup from the top 1%. And here's why I brought up this website to show you just a couple of quotes. This is the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, a guide to statistics on historical trends in income inequality. So they say the broad facts of income inequality over the past 7 decades are easily summarized. The years from the end of World War II into the 1970s were ones of substantial economic growth and broadly shared prosperity. Okay, so incomes grew rapidly at roughly the same rate up and down the income ladder, roughly doubling in inflation-adjusted terms between the late 1940s and the early 1970s. So until the 70s, from the end of the World War, the rich were still making a lot of money, but the income was shared more or less evenly. But what happened? The gap between those high up the income ladder and those on the middle and lower rungs, while substantial, did not change much during this period. Okay, as I've just said. But beginning in the 1970s, economic growth slowed and the income gap widened. Income growth for households in the middle and lower parts of the distribution slowed sharply, while incomes at the top continued to grow strongly. The concentration of income at the very top of the distribution rose to levels last seen nearly a century ago during the Roaring '20s. And here they talk about wealth. And a perfect way to visualize this is another very interesting website called WTF Happened in 1971.com. Literally, this is, I'm pretty sure there's no actual commentary on this. It's literally graphs that show particular trends, especially when it comes to wealth distribution and GDP and all these sorts of things from the 1970s to today. And here again, you can clearly see and visualize the data. Something happened in 1971 actually, that changed things. So productivity kept going up, compensation kind of stagnated, went up a little bit. Real GDP, real wages, and trade policies. Here again, you can see this bifurcation in these different trends. Real GDP per capita is still going up, but average real wage going up a little bit, stagnating here. Real median weekly wages earning of full-time workers. And again, you can just look it up for yourself. It's literally, this website is literally just graphs and data. And it's very interesting to see. So I don't want to go down the whole gold standard rabbit hole, but I'll just say it quickly just because it's important to mention. In 1971, there was a decoupling from money and gold. So we had the gold standard where money was tied to an underlying asset of value, which was gold. That changed with Bretton Woods. And then in 1971, Nixon, I believe it was, completely changed, decoupled the two. And since then, we've basically had fiat money, which is money printed out of thin air. And what I think has happened, but of course, I'm not the finance guy here, so there's many more reputable sources that can talk about this. And as I said, I don't want to go down too deep this rabbit hole because it really is a rabbit hole, the whole like what is money really. And I really encourage you to ask yourself, if you don't know what money is, to ask yourself that question and do your research, because it really is staggering the systems that we have created. And basically, but just to give you a quick overview of what I think, is that since money was decoupled from real value, there has been a sort of onset of a lack of discipline from banks, central banks especially, but also commercial banks, and other financial institutions. And the perfect example of this is, of course, the crash of 2008, 2009. But not only, because we've seen since then these sort of boom bust cycles that have basically sucked up the middle class, extracted wealth, and put it at the top. And what I think the big picture here to understand is that I think the powers that be, whether it's the World Economic Forum, all the partners that have gotten together over the years to build this network of power, is that this cannot go on any longer without some sort of revolution. So what I really think is happening is that they are selling us basically this great reset, and in order to supposedly change the system, but are the people that arguably got us in this position the ones really that we should be looking to in order to change it and make it better and make it work for everyone, and all this talk of inclusive capitalism and this sort of thing? I would say no, but of course, that's up to you to decide. And in this regard, there's actually a very interesting article that was written by a man called Mark Keenan. Now, I'm not going to read you all of this. I'll just have highlighted a few things. And this man is it's interesting because he used to work, as you can see here, he's the former environmental affairs officer at the United Nations. So again, he's not some kind of tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist that came up with this. He used to work at the United Nations, used to be part of this sort of system of multilateral global governance. And he's telling us, let's see what he's telling us. So for decades, there have been false and deceptive narratives disseminated by organizations, including the UN, the WHO, and the World Economic Forum, by the governments that comply with these narratives, and by the corporate-owned media. Pretty big sweeping statements there, Mr. Keenan. So these narratives include the deceptive political schemes of sustainable development, Agenda 21, 2030, combating climate change, and the WTF reset of society under cover of what has been proven to be a fake pandemic. Again, very big sweeping statements there. According to the WHO's official statistics, up to 650,000 people normally die every year from flu. Yet it has never before been called a pandemic or regarded as a cause for a world lockdown. Beyond the attractively designed rhetoric of politically defined sustainable development, deeper analysis shows it is a deceptive narrative that has facilitated ongoing globalization, a process which has had serious detrimental consequences for the environment and the well-being of society. And this makes me think, not in terms of the environment, but the well-being of society. Like, it's clear now how much damage things like social media and the prevalence of digitalization in our lives is doing. I mean, we know this. The problem is that these things are so addictive that even though we know, we still, of course, use these things all the time, which is fine. But the things that are being proposed here and now I'm talking more about not just a Great Reset, but things like initiatives, well, not initiatives, but concepts like the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which have been also pushed by Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. He himself even wrote a book called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. And he literally talks about the mixing of the digital and the biological and the physical and all these futuristic sort of ideas about how we relate to each other as humans. And, that's why I wanted to bring this up. It's like, clearly these things have not been really good for the overall well-being of society, but here we have these massively powerful institutions wanting to push us even more in that direction, where we are now not only using digital tools and technologies, but integrating them within ourselves. Again, this is not conspiracy. I'm sorry to tell you. The nanotechnology and AI and brain chips, these things have been actively worked on. I used to not really believe in these things either, but the evidence is there for everyone to see. And anyway, he continues, the concept of man-made climate change has been utilized for political agenda of taxation. Okay. Now, I want to talk about more how this relates to the COVID crisis and how it's affecting us. And here he says, the truth is that a controlled economic demolition is taking place. Over the past decades, a small group have gained and consolidated immense wealth via control of the debt money creation system, what I was talking about earlier, privately owned megabanks and mega corporations. This process was powered by the associated GDP hypergrowth paradigm of globalization. Over the decades, the debt money component of the system has resulted in worldwide debt slavery, with virtually all governments in debt to the international private banking system. A lot to be said there. This served the immense wealth accumulation plans of those few in control of the system, but the system was ultimately flawed and unsustainable. What I was saying, these people have long planned to dismantle their flawed economic system and collapse society to the detriment of humanity, and clear a path or excuse for the introduction of their nefarious ideal, a technocratic authoritarian reset of society and centralized one world government. Again, big claims, but the evidence seems to point towards this sort of analysis that is often deemed as conspiratorial as tinfoil hat theory being correct. And that's quite a frightening prospect. And more people need to talk about this. And it's incredible, I think, the silence of the media. Where are the investigative journalists? I mean, I follow a couple that have been talking about this, but they're not really being given any sort of coverage in the media. There's so much that has been going on behind the scenes in terms of the way that these public-private partnerships have captured, and that's the next thing I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you a clip by the Transnational Institute where this precise issue of private capture of the public sector in a way, and this sort of corporate coup has been taking place. And it's frankly, and I was just talking about the media side, it's incredible how, because am I really to believe that all of media has been brought up by these same interests? That's unbelievable to me. I don't even want to believe that. And but again, where are the journalists talking about this? Who knows? So as I just said, I want to show you a clip by the Transnational Institute, and this is titled "The Global Coup d'Etat," and it's an interview by Lynn Fries, who interviews Nick Buxton, and he'll introduce himself and give you some backgrounds about who he is. And I'm just going to show you 5 minutes of this clip. It's a half an hour video, and it's definitely interesting in terms of understanding what's happening. So I'll see you right after the video.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lynn Fries, producer of Global Political Economy, or GB News Docs. Today I'm joined by Nick Buxton. He's going to be giving us some big picture context on the Great Reset, a World Economic Forum initiative to reset the world system of global governance. A worldwide movement crossing not only borders but all walks of life, from peasant farmers to techies, is fighting against this initiative on the grounds that it represents a major threat to democracy. Key voices from the health, food, education, indigenous people, and high-tech movements explained why in the Great Takeover, How We Fight the Davos Capture of Global Governance, a recent webinar hosted by the Transnational Institute. Today's guest, Nick Buxton, is a publications editor and future labs coordinator at the Transnational Institute. He's the founder and chief editor of TNI's flagship State of Power report. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, Lynn.
Nick, the Transnational Institute was co-organizer of the Great Takeover webinar. So what is it that you're mobilizing against in opposing this Great Reset initiative?
What we're really concerned about is this initiative by the World Economic Forum actually looks to entrench the power of those most responsible for the crises we're facing. And in many ways it's a trick, it's a sleight of hand to make sure that things continue as they are, to continue the same. That will create more of these crises, more of these pandemics, will deepen the climate crisis, which will deepen inequality. It's not a great reset at all, it's a great corporate takeover, and that's what we were trying to draw attention to. What we've been finding in recent years is that really there is something, I would call it a kind of a global silent coup d'etat going on in terms of global governance. Most people don't see it, and people have become familiar with the way that corporations have far more influence and are being integrated into policy making at a national level. They see that more more in front of them. People see their services being privatized. They see the influence of the oil companies or the banking sector that has stopped actions such as regulations of banks or dealing with the climate crisis. What people don't realize is that at a global level, there has been something much more silent going on, which is that their governance, which used to be by nations, is now increasingly be done by unaccountable bodies dominated by corporations. And part of the problem is that that has been happening in lots of different sectors, but people haven't been connecting the dots. So what we've been trying to do in the last year is to talk with people in the health movement, for example, people involved in public education, people involved in food sector, to say what is happening in your sector. And what we found is that in each of these sectors, global decisions used to be discussed by bodies such as the WHO or such as the Food and Agriculture Organization, were increasingly done by these unaccountable bodies. Just to give an example, we have now the global pandemic, and one of the key bodies that is now making the decision is a facility called COVAX. You'd have thought global health should be run by the World Health Organization. It's accountable to the United Nations. It has a system of accountability. Well, what's actually happening is that World Health Organization is just one of a few partners, but really it's been controlled by corporations and corporate interests. In this case, it's Gavi and CEPI, and they are both bodies which don't have a system of accountability, where it's not clear who chose them, who they're accountable to, or how they can be held to account. And what we do see is that there's a lot of corporate influence in each of these bodies. What this webinar was about was bringing all these sectors together who are seeing this silent coup d'etat going on in their own sector to map it out. And so one of the things that you'll see in the webinar is this mapping of the different sectors who are seeing this going on. And the idea is just to give a global picture that this is something happening. We've had more than 100 of these they call multi-stakeholder bodies coming to the fore in the last 20 years, and there's been very little kind of taking note of that and taking stock of what's emerging, and what's emerging is this silent global coup d'etat.
And there you have it, pretty aptly put. And I especially liked how Nick related it to the current crisis, so-called, of COVID, and how it's been managed, and how he correctly pointed out that it should be the WHO, which is accountable to the UN, to be in charge of the response. And it seems that it has been, if you've been watching the news, without actually analyzing and going deeper into the sort of behind the scenes aspect of this. But the reality is that the WHO has been pretty much controlled by institutions like Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, CEPI, the Center for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, and of course, big player, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which has its tentacles all over global health. I mean, all over global health. This is no hyperbole. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation effectively has a monopoly on global health. And you can look into the decade of vaccines and these sorts of initiatives that were launched already back in 2009, 2010, and the fact that they've been making moves. And now I have another clip to show you, and this highlights this perfectly. It goes so well together. And this is a WHO whistleblower by the name of Dr. Astrid Stuckelberger, who has worked with the WHO for over 20 years. And basically, this video is a testimony that she's giving to a German committee that is basically led by Rainer Füllmich, who is a jurist. And he is known for prosecuting Volkswagen in their sort of emission scandal. I think it was back in 2014. And Deutsche Bank, which, by the way, if we just look, is Deutsche Bank, actually I haven't looked this up. Of course, Deutsche Bank is part of the partners, just to, create another little link there and help you understand. So basically, going back to what I was saying, she's given a testimony to this committee, which is basically investigating. They're building up a case against the WHO, against the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and other institutions for defrauding the world and for creating a fake pandemic effectively. And that, of course, I'm not going to get into that now, but the important part is what she's saying here and the connections that exist and what individuals, not even institutions, what individuals with huge amounts of power like Bill Gates have been doing in order to consolidate their influence and to benefit, their shareholders pretty much, because the financial interests here are enormous with the vaccine production and the various companies and the conflict, the revolving doors between supposed philanthropic foundations and the vaccine manufacturers. It's crazy. So just listen to what she has to say. And again, I'll see you in, I think it's 4 minutes, this clip. This is in minute 11 of the 28, basically half an hour testimony that she gives. And this is where she talks about Bill Gates and Gavi and what's happening and the relationship with the WHO. So I will see you in a moment.
The 2016 third edition. What happened in WHO, but maybe Sylvia, you were there when it happened. Bill Gates was already around. He was already, mingling, saying that he pays so much money. But he became visible when, I think it was in 2017, or you correct me, that I know this through my colleagues there, he requested to be part of the executive board of WHO like a member state. And it's incredible. I said, how can he dare to do this? And they went to the vote. The executive board meets every January. And it changes every year. And the lobby, they tried to lobby the countries. Of course, he tried to bribe. But it's really an event because it is not mentioned. Maybe we can get the minutes of the executive board. They even accepted that he would be considered as a member state because of the money he gives. So this is unprecedented in a constitution of member states.
Is he now being considered as a member state?
Not officially.
But unofficially?
Not that I know. Maybe there are documents.
Yes. And that's probably because that's why he has this immunity, right?
He has total immunity in Switzerland.
Unofficially, he probably holds that kind of status, right?
Yeah. I can tell you why it is very suspicious is because I think he has done something with every member state, the same contracts. What I found out with Swissmedic is the FDA of Switzerland, is because I gave the paper to a journalist and now I don't even find it. I can't find it. The Swissmedic has signed a contract with Bill Gates and WHO. And this is abnormal.
So basically he literally tried to lobby himself into the WHO as a member state to basically found the country of Bill Gatestan. That's basically what he did. At that point he would have been basically a one-man country.
Yes, he can be a dictator because he can influence but the fact that he was not accepted by vote, that's why the minutes would be very interesting, by vote to be a member state, he then started to sign papers for countries, that's my hypothesis, because he did it with Swissmedic. So WHO, Bill Gates, and the country in charge of accrediting treatments and vaccination are signing contracts.
So he didn't get in official capacity. He didn't get voted in. So then he tried to circumvent that and just basically went around the middleman.
Well, yeah. How can you, if your country sign a contract between three signatures, Bill Gates, a country, and WHO, because WHO signs with countries, but not, and even that I find pretty weird. Why does WHO have to sign with a country an agreement? I don't know. You see, this is a corporate agency doing that, but not WHO. Correct me, Sylvia. But WHO accepts to have a private company, selling, a merchant, signing together the three to make the surveillance and to choose the medication. I think that, Swissmedic had posted it on the website. I think that every country, that's my hypothesis, they have done this everywhere. That's why everybody says the same thing in the train, the same message. Every week there's the same thing happening.
Are you starting to see it? Are you starting to see how the different pieces of the puzzle fit together, and how this global corporate coup d'etat, as it was called by Nick Buxton, has been reflected in the management of this pandemic and in this massive push to vaccinate, to create digital certificates? Bill Gates was already in March of last year. He did a Reddit AMA. I can probably find it quite easy because I had searched it already. Here. So he did a Reddit Ask Me Anything session where he had already, and this is over a year ago, mind you, before the pandemic became really prominent. And what did he say? The question of which businesses should keep going is tricky. He was asked this question. I can't find that now, but I'll be wasting time if I look for it. And I really am confused about how Reddit works and the threads and everything. But he says, the question of which businesses should keep going is tricky. Certainly food supply and the health system. We still need water, electricity, and the internet. Supply chains for critical things need to be maintained. Countries are still figuring out what to keep running. Eventually we will have some kind of digital certificates to show who has recovered or been tested recently, or when we have a vaccine, who has received it. I mean, again, are you starting to see it? Are you starting to see how the different pieces fit together, and how this is ushering in this, is setting the stage effectively for this great reset? So, okay, so today we've looked at the World Economic Forum, their mission, the Great Reset agenda. We've looked at some direct quotes from the book that was written by Klaus Schwab, and how he talks about literally letting the economy die in order to usher in a new age. We've looked at the bigger financial picture and how these massive trends have led to this moment, or at least myself, as myself and others would argue. We've looked at Mark Keenan, who used to work for the UN, and what he believes. Tinfoil hatter, huh? Yeah, sure. And then we showed you this video about the corporate coup and how this all fits together. And finally, how it relates to the current situation that we're going through. There's a new travel ban in the UK issued, 5,000 fines for anyone who leaves on holiday. We've seen the passing of this new draconian policing bill that prevents people from protesting as much as before. I haven't looked into that as much, but from the scenes that I've seen in Bristol, the protests of the last couple of days, it does seem that there is basically a consolidation of state power happening, and not just in the UK, of course. And yeah, so here we are. I'm curious to know what you think about this. I'm more than happy to receive criticism and comments and questions, because I really do think that what's happening at this point is pretty much undeniable. So whatever you got, maybe you even agree with what's happening. Maybe you think this sort of global problems require global solutions kind of thing. And even I would be inclined to agree to an extent, but clearly what's happening is that these incredibly wealthy powers and corporate and financial interests are getting together to lay out, to set the agenda, as we've seen from our mission, to shape the global, regional, and industry agenda of the world, pretty much. And yeah, so here we are, guys. What do you think? Should we trust these people with deciding the future of humanity? Or should we maybe say something and fight back? It's up to you to decide. I'll speak to you soon, guys.